They mocked the quiet mechanic for her obsession with outdated aircraft systems, called her methods old-fashioned and unnecessary, until the day 47 passengers' lives depended on the very knowledge everyone said was worthless. Sarah Chen had been working at Pacific Airways for 8 years, but she still arrived at the hangar every morning at 0500 hours, a full 2 hours before her shift began. The habit came from her time as a staff sergeant in the Air Force, where she'd maintained C-130 Hercules aircraft in some of the most challenging conditions on Earth. Now in the sterile environment of San Francisco International Airport's maintenance Facility D, that military precision made her colleagues uncomfortable. She walked through the massive hangar where 3 Boeing 737-800s sat like sleeping giants under the fluorescent lights. Her steel-toed boots echoed against the polished concrete floor as she made her way to her workstation, a corner area that most of the other mechanics avoided. While they clustered around the coffee machine, discussing weekend plans or the latest sports scores, Sarah preferred the company of technical manuals and diagnostic equipment. Her workbench was meticulously organized in a way that would have made her old flight chief proud. Every tool had its designated place, marked with white tape and labeled in her precise handwriting. Vintage aircraft maintenance manuals from the 1980s and 1990s sat alongside modern diagnostic computers, their worn covers a stark contrast to the sleek tablets everyone else used. These weren't just books to Sarah. They were lifelines containing knowledge that had been tested in real-world situations long before computers could diagnose everything the other mechanics often joked about. Her museum collection, but Sarah understood something they didn't. Modern aircraft were built with redundant systems and computer oversight, but underneath all that technology, they were still machines governed by the same principles of physics, hydraulics, and mechanical engineering that had kept planes flying for decades. When the computers failed, when the diagnostic systems went dark, someone had to understand how these machines actually worked. Sarah pulled out her personal toolkit, a collection of tools she'd carried since her military days. Some were standard issue, others were modifications she'd made herself during long deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. The adjustable wrench with the grip tape she'd added during a sandstorm repair in Kandahar. The custom-made pressure gauge she'd built when the standard equipment couldn't handle the extreme temperatures at forward operating base lightning. Each tool told a story of problems solved and aircraft kept flying when failure wasn't an option. Her colleagues began trickling in around 0700 hours, and with them came the familiar atmosphere of casual indifference that bothered her more than she cared to admit. Where she saw precision engineering that demanded respect and careful attention, they saw routine maintenance tasks to be completed as quickly as possible. Where she saw potential failure points that required constant vigilance, they saw problems that computers would catch long before they became dangerous. "Morning, Chen," called Tommy Rodriguez, a mechanic 10 years her junior who'd never worked on anything that didn't have a digital interface. "Still reading those antique manuals? You know we have computers that can diagnose problems in real time now, right?" Sarah looked up from the hydraulic systems manual she'd been reviewing, specifically the section on manual pressure bleeding procedures. "Computers can't tell you everything, Tommy. They can tell you what's wrong, but they can't always tell you why it's wrong or how to fix it when you don't have the luxury of ordering new parts." Tommy laughed, shaking his head as he walked toward his assigned aircraft. "You military types are all the same. Always preparing for World War III when all we're doing is routine maintenance on passenger jets. This isn't a combat zone, Chen. We've got supply chains, backup systems, and protocols for everything." But Sarah had seen what happened when supply chains broke down, when backup systems failed simultaneously, when protocols weren't written for the specific crisis you were facing. She'd kept aircraft flying with jury-rigged solutions and improvised Repairs because lives depended on those planes getting back in the air. In Iraq, she'd once repaired a damaged hydraulic line using nothing but spare tubing, military-grade tape, and principles she'd learned from a manual written before she was born. The morning briefing began at 0800 hours sharp, led by maintenance supervisor Rick Morrison, a career aviation man who'd worked his way up from the shop floor. Morrison was fair but pragmatic, focused on efficiency and meeting the airline's increasingly tight turnaround schedules. Pacific Airways was struggling to compete with budget carriers, and every minute an aircraft spent in maintenance was money lost. "All right, people, listen up," Morrison announced to the gathered mechanics. "We've got 3 birds scheduled for routine maintenance today. The 737 in Bay 2 needs a hydraulic system check. Bay 3 has a scheduled engine inspection, and Bay 1 is getting avionics updates. Corporate is breathing down our necks about turnaround times, so let's keep it moving." Sarah raised her hand. "Rick, I noticed some irregularities in the hydraulic pressure readings on the Bay 2 aircraft during the pre-inspection yesterday. The computer diagnostics show everything within normal parameters, but the manual pressure tests are showing microfluctuations that could indicate seal degradation in the backup system." Morrison sighed, the kind of tired exhale that suggested he'd had this conversation with Sarah before. "Chen, the computer diagnostic says the system is green. The FAA inspection requirements say we test within specified parameters, and we're well within those parameters. We can't ground aircraft based on microfluctuations that don't affect performance or safety. But if the backup hydraulic system is compromised and the primary system fails simultaneously, then the tertiary system kicks in," interrupted Jason Ward, the newest addition to their team and Morrison's obvious favorite. Ward had a degree in aeronautical engineering and in confidence that came from textbook knowledge rather than hands-on experience. "These aircraft have triple redundancy for critical systems. The statistical probability of total hydraulic failure is essentially 0. Sarah bit back her response. She'd seen essentially 0 probability events happen more times than she cared to remember. In combat, Murphy's Law wasn't just a saying. It was a fundamental principle of survival. If something could go wrong, it eventually would, usually at the worst possible moment. "Look, Chen," Morrison continued, his tone softening slightly, "I respect your thoroughness, I really do. But we've got deadlines to meet and budgets to consider. The computers are there for a reason. They're more accurate than manual testing, they catch problems earlier, and they help us maintain aircraft more efficiently than we ever could using old-school methods." As the briefing concluded and mechanics dispersed to their assignments, Sarah found herself once again feeling like an outsider in her own workplace. She understood the pressure Morrison was under, the financial realities of commercial aviation, and the genuine improvements that modern diagnostic systems had brought to aircraft maintenance. But she also understood that redundancy was only as good as the systems that controlled it, and that sometimes the most dangerous failures were the ones that looked safe on a computer screen. She gathered her tools and headed toward Bay 2, where the Boeing 737-800 waited for its hydraulic system inspection. As she approached the aircraft, she could already see the subtle signs that the diagnostic computers had missed. A barely perceptible dampness around one of the hydraulic fittings. A slight discoloration on a seal that suggested it was beginning to deteriorate. These weren't failures yet, but they were whispers of failures to come. Sarah opened her toolkit and pulled out a manual pressure gauge, the same type she'd used on military aircraft before digital diagnostics became standard. She connected it to the backup hydraulic system and watched the needle fluctuate in a pattern that told her a story the computers couldn't read. The system was technically functional, but it was living on borrowed time. Around her, the hangar hummed with the sounds of modern aircraft maintenance. Pneumatic tools, computer diagnostic systems, and the constant chatter of mechanics working efficiently through their assigned tasks. But Sarah heard something else in that mechanical symphony, the sound of an industry that had forgotten how to listen to the machines themselves, how to read the subtle signs that spelled the difference between a safe flight and a disaster waiting to happen. She made careful notes in her maintenance log, documenting the microfluctuations and the visual signs of wear that the computers had classified as within normal parameters. She knew Morrison wouldn't approve any additional maintenance based on her observations, but she also knew that someone needed to be paying attention to the details that fell between the lines of official protocols. As Sarah worked methodically through her inspection, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was seeing the early warnings of something much more serious than routine maintenance issues. Her years of military experience had taught her to trust her instincts, to pay attention to the small problems before they became big ones. But in the civilian world of commercial aviation, those instincts were increasingly viewed as paranoia rather than prudence. 3 weeks after Sarah's hydraulic concerns were dismissed, Pacific Airways announced the arrival of their new Director of Maintenance Operations, Marcus Wellington. Wellington came from Apex Aviation Solutions, a consulting firm that specialized in streamlining airline maintenance operations through advanced technology integration. His reputation preceded him, a Harvard MBA who had revolutionized maintenance protocols at 3 major carriers, reducing costs by 30% while maintaining perfect safety records. Wellington's first all-hands meeting was scheduled for Monday morning in the main conference room, a sterile space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway. Sarah arrived early, taking a seat in the back row where she could observe without drawing attention. The room gradually filled with mechanics, supervisors, and administrative staff, their conversations a mix of curiosity and apprehension about what changes the new director might bring. At exactly 0800 hours, Wellington entered the room with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. He was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in his early 40s, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in the industrial environment of the maintenance facility. His presentation materials were already loaded on the overhead display, sleek charts showing cost reductions, efficiency improvements, and technological innovations. "Good morning, everyone," Wellington began, his voice carrying the polished tone of corporate boardrooms. "I'm here because Pacific Airways has recognized the need to modernize our maintenance operations to remain competitive in today's aviation market. The days of intuition-based maintenance and outdated manual procedures are behind us. We're entering a new era of data-driven decision-making and predictive maintenance technology." Sarah felt her stomach tighten as Wellington outlined his vision. He spoke about artificial intelligence systems that could predict component failures weeks in advance, automated diagnostic protocols that eliminated human error, and streamlined procedures that would reduce aircraft downtime by 40%. Every slide in his presentation emphasized efficiency, cost reduction, and the elimination of what he called redundant human oversight. "I've reviewed our current maintenance protocols," Wellington continued, clicking to a slide that showed a breakdown of time spent on various inspection procedures. "What I've found is a significant amount of time being wasted on manual inspections that duplicate information already provided by our computer diagnostic systems. In the modern aviation industry, we simply cannot afford to have mechanics performing outdated procedures that add no measurable value to aircraft safety or performance." Tommy Rodriguez raised his hand from the front row. "Sir, what exactly do you mean by outdated procedures? Are we talking about eliminating certain inspections?" "Entirely?" Wellington smiled, the expression of someone who had anticipated this question. "Excellent question. I'm talking about replacing subjective human observations with objective data analysis. For example, instead of having a mechanic manually test hydraulic pressure using analog gauges, We rely on the aircraft's built-in diagnostic systems to provide real-time pressure readings with much greater accuracy and consistency. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her toolkit, where her manual pressure gauge lay among the other tools Wellington would apparently consider obsolete. She thought about the microfluctuations she'd detected just weeks earlier, the subtle patterns that the computer systems had classified as normal, but which had told her a different story about the aircraft's condition. The data is clear, Wellington continued, advancing to a slide showing maintenance statistics from other airlines that had implemented his protocols. Airlines using advanced predictive maintenance systems experience 40% fewer in-flight mechanical issues, 35% reduction in maintenance costs, and 95% improvement in on-time performance. These aren't just numbers, they represent the future of aviation maintenance. Morrison, who had been listening intently from the second row, spoke up. Mr. Wellington, our mechanics have varying levels of experience with these advanced systems. What kind of training timeline are we looking at for full implementation? Another excellent question. Rick, the beauty of these systems is that they require minimal human intervention once properly configured. We'll be transitioning away from experience-based maintenance toward protocol-based maintenance. Instead of relying on individual mechanics to interpret data or make subjective judgments, we'll have standardized procedures that any technician can follow regardless of their experience level. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Wellington wasn't just talking about updating equipment or improving efficiency. He was talking about fundamentally changing the role of mechanics from skilled craftsmen to protocol followers. The years of experience she'd gained in the military, the intuitive understanding of how aircraft systems behaved under stress, the ability to detect problems that didn't show up on computer screens, all of it was being categorized as unnecessary. In Wellington's vision of modern maintenance, Jason Ward, always eager to align himself with management, raised his hand enthusiastically. "Sir, this sounds like exactly what the industry needs. I've read about similar implementations at European carriers with remarkable success rates. How quickly can we begin transitioning to these new protocols?" Wellington's approval was evident in his response. "I'm glad you asked, Jason. We'll be implementing these changes in phases over the next 6 months. Phase 1 begins immediately with the installation of advanced diagnostic systems on all aircraft. Phase 2 will introduce automated maintenance scheduling based on algorithmic analysis rather than manual inspection intervals. Phase 3 will be the complete transition to digital maintenance logs and the elimination of redundant manual procedures." The meeting continued for another 45 minutes, with Wellington fielding questions about specific technical implementations and timeline concerns. Throughout the discussion, Sarah noticed a pattern in how he responded to different types of questions. Technical questions about computer systems and data analysis received detailed, enthusiastic answers. Questions about maintaining existing safety margins or preserving institutional knowledge were dismissed with references to improved efficiency and modern industry standards. As the meeting concluded, Wellington made an announcement that sent a clear message about his priorities. "I want to recognize the mechanics who have already embraced modern diagnostic techniques and data-driven maintenance approaches. These individuals will be forming our advanced maintenance team, which will receive additional training on the new systems and take leadership roles in implementing our modernization program." He read a list of names, starting with Jason Ward and including several of the younger mechanics who had joined Pacific Airways directly from technical schools. Sarah noticed that none of the older mechanics were mentioned, particularly those with military backgrounds who had learned their trade before computerized systems became standard. After the meeting, as people filed out of the conference room, Sarah overheard fragments of conversations that confirmed her growing concerns about Wellington's approach. Tommy Rodriguez was already discussing how much faster inspections would be without manual pressure tests. Jason Ward was enthusiastically explaining to anyone who would listen how artificial intelligence would eliminate human error from maintenance procedures. But Sarah also noticed something else. The older mechanics were unusually quiet. Frank Kowalski, who had been maintaining aircraft for 35 years, walked past her without his usual morning greeting. Maria Santos, a former Navy mechanic with 20 years of experience, looked troubled as she headed back toward the hangar. Floor, Wellington's message had been clear, even if he hadn't stated it explicitly. The future of maintenance at Pacific Airways belonged to those who embraced technology and followed protocols without question. There was no place in his vision for mechanics who insisted on manual verification, who trusted their experience over computer readouts, or who believed that human judgment was an essential component of aircraft safety. That afternoon, Sarah found herself standing next to the same Boeing 737-800 she had inspected weeks earlier. The hydraulic system she had flagged for potential issues was still showing green on all computer diagnostics. According to Wellington's new protocols, this aircraft was perfectly airworthy and ready for passenger service. But Sarah's manual pressure tests continued to show the same troubling microfluctuations that suggested underlying problems the computers couldn't detect. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the aircraft and thinking about Wellington's presentation. In his world of data-driven maintenance and algorithmic decision-making, her concerns about barely perceptible pressure variations would be classified as irrelevant. Computer said the system was fine, and in Wellington's hierarchy of authority, computers were more reliable than human observation. But Sarah remembered a C-130 in Iraq that had passed every computer diagnostic before suffering catastrophic hydraulic failure on approach to a forward operating base. She remembered the lives that had been saved because a veteran crew chief had insisted on manual pressure tests that revealed problems the sophisticated diagnostic systems had missed. She remembered learning that sometimes the most dangerous failures were the ones that looked perfect on a computer screen. As the sun set over San Francisco International Airport, Sarah made a decision that would define the remainder of her career at Pacific Airways. She would continue performing the manual inspections and maintaining the detailed records that Wellington considered obsolete. She would keep her vintage manuals updated and her old-school tools calibrated. Because somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear her old flight chief's voice, reminding her that aircraft don't care about corporate efficiency metrics. They only care about the laws of physics and the skill of the people who maintain them. 2 months into Wellington's modernization program, Sarah's concerns about the hydraulic systems had evolved from suspicion to certainty. Every manual inspection she conducted revealed the same troubling pattern: microfluctuations in pressure that fell just within the acceptable parameters programmed into the diagnostic computers, but which showed a consistent degradation trend that any experienced mechanic would recognize as a warning sign. The Boeing 737-800 in Bay 2 had become her unofficial case study. Aircraft tail number N847PA had been flagged in her personal maintenance log 17 times over the past 8 weeks, each entry documenting pressure variations that the computerized systems classified as normal operational variance. But Sarah's hand-drawn charts showed a clear pattern of decline that suggested the backup hydraulic system was operating under increasing stress. On a foggy Tuesday morning in October, Sarah arrived at the maintenance facility to find N847PA scheduled for a routine pre-flight inspection before its 0630 departure to Seattle. The aircraft had been cleared by the night shift using Wellington's new streamlined protocols, which relied entirely on automated diagnostic reports generated by the aircraft's onboard monitoring systems. According to the digital maintenance log, all systems were functioning within normal parameters. Sarah approached Morrison's office, her personal maintenance folder tucked under her arm. Through the glass partition, she could see him reviewing the morning's flight schedules on his computer the familiar stress lines around his eyes more pronounced than usual. Pacific Airways had been under increasing pressure from corporate headquarters to improve on-time performance, and any maintenance delays that weren't absolutely necessary were being scrutinized by Wellington's efficiency metrics. "Rick, I need to talk to you about N847PA, Sarah said, knocking on the doorframe. "I've been tracking some concerning trends in the backup hydraulic system that I think warrant additional inspection before today's flight." Morrison looked up from his screen, and Sarah could see the internal conflict playing out across his face. Over the years, he had learned to respect her judgment, but he was also operating under new pressure from above to follow Wellington's protocols without deviation. "Sarah, we've been through this before." The computer diagnostics show green across the board. Wellington was very clear about not second-guessing the automated systems without concrete evidence of actual malfunction. Sarah opened her folder and spread out the hand-drawn charts she had been maintaining. "This is concrete evidence, Rick. Look at these pressure readings over the past 2 months. The computer classifies each individual reading as normal, but when you plot them over time, there's a clear pattern of degradation in the backup system's performance." Morrison studied the charts, his finger tracing the subtle downward trend Sarah had documented. For a moment, she thought she saw recognition in his eyes, the understanding that comes from years of working with mechanical systems. But then he glanced toward the main hangar floor, where Wellington was conducting his daily efficiency review with clipboard in hand. "Sarah, I appreciate your thoroughness, I really do. But these readings you're showing me are all within manufacturer specifications. The FAA certification requirements don't require us to ground aircraft based on trends that stay within operational parameters. If I delayed every flight based on readings that were technically acceptable, Wellington would have my job by the end of the week. But what if the primary system fails during flight?" Sarah pressed. "These pressure variations suggest the backup system is already under stress. If it has to take over the full hydraulic load suddenly, we could be looking at complete system failure." Morrison closed the folder and handed it back to her. "Sarah, that's exactly the kind of thinking Wellington is trying to eliminate. You're creating hypothetical scenarios based on subjective interpretation of data that our sophisticated computer systems have already analyzed. The probability calculations show that simultaneous failure of primary and backup hydraulic systems is statistically negligible." As if summoned by their conversation, Wellington appeared in the doorway, his tablet displaying real-time maintenance metrics for the morning shift. His expression carried the focused intensity of someone who had identified an inefficiency that needed to be corrected. "Is there a problem here?" Wellington asked, his tone suggesting that any delay in the morning schedule would be viewed as a personal failure on Morrison's part. Morrison straightened in his chair. "Chen has some concerns about N847PA's hydraulic system. I was just explaining that our diagnostic protocols have already cleared the aircraft for service." Wellington's attention turned to Sarah, and she could feel him evaluating her as a potential obstacle to his efficiency objectives. "Ms. Chen, isn't it? I've noticed your name appearing frequently in maintenance reports, usually in connection with requests for additional inspections that our automated systems haven't flagged as necessary." Sarah met his gaze directly. "Mr. Wellington, I've been tracking pressure variations in the backup hydraulic system that suggest potential reliability issues. While the readings are technically within acceptable parameters, the trend data indicates increasing stress on the system." Wellington's smile was patient but condescending. "Ms. Chen, that's precisely the kind of outdated thinking we're working to eliminate. Modern aircraft systems are designed with multiple redundancies and sophisticated monitoring capabilities. The computer systems analyzing that hydraulic data have access to thousands of variables and comparison points that no human mechanic could possibly process manually. If there were a genuine safety concern, our diagnostic systems would have flagged it immediately." But computers can only analyze what they're programmed to look for, Sarah replied. Sometimes mechanical systems fail in ways that don't fit the programmed parameters. In my experience, your experience, Wellington interrupted, is based on older aircraft with less sophisticated monitoring systems. These modern Boeing 737-800s have computer systems that continuously monitor every aspect of hydraulic performance with precision that far exceeds manual testing methods. We cannot afford to ground aircraft based on subjective interpretations of data that our certified systems have already validated. Sarah glanced at Morrison, hoping to find some support, but his expression told her that the decision had already been made. The pressure from corporate headquarters, combined with Wellington's modernization mandate, had created an environment where questioning computer diagnostics was viewed as obstruction rather than due diligence. Furthermore, Wellington continued, checking his tablet, I see that you've been spending considerable time on manual inspections that aren't part of our approved maintenance protocols. That represents a significant inefficiency in our operations. I think it would be beneficial for you to attend our upcoming training session on advanced diagnostic interpretation. We need all our mechanics working from the same technological foundation. The training session Wellington referenced was scheduled for the following week, designed to teach mechanics how to interpret computer diagnostic reports without relying on manual verification procedures. Sarah had seen the preliminary materials, which emphasized trust in automated systems and discouraged what they called redundant manual testing protocols. As Wellington left to continue his morning review, Morrison turned back to Sarah with an expression that mixed sympathy with resignation. Sarah, you need to understand the position I'm in here. Pacific Airways is struggling to stay competitive, and Wellington's efficiency improvements are the only thing keeping us from deeper budget cuts. I can't authorize maintenance delays based on trend analysis that doesn't violate any actual safety specifications. Sarah gathered her charts and folders, understanding that further argument would only damage her position without changing the outcome. An 847 PA would fly to Seattle that morning with 47 passengers aboard, its backup hydraulic system carrying the stress pattern she had documented, but which no one in authority was willing to acknowledge as significant. That afternoon, Sarah made her way to the aircraft parts storage facility, a warehouse-sized building adjacent to the main hangar. She had an idea that might help her build a stronger case for her concerns, but it would require access to maintenance records that weren't part of the standard computer database. The parts facility was managed by Elena Rodriguez, Tommy's aunt, and a 30-year veteran of aircraft maintenance who had worked her way up from inventory clerk to facility supervisor. Elena had a reputation for maintaining detailed records and institutional knowledge that went far beyond the computerized tracking systems. Elena, I need a favor, Sarah said, finding the older woman reviewing shipping manifests at her desk. I'm looking for historical maintenance data on hydraulic components for the 737-800 fleet, specifically seal replacement patterns and pressure system repairs over the past 5 years. Elena looked up from her paperwork, her experienced eyes studying Sarah's face. This wouldn't have anything to do with your concerns about N847PA, would it? Tommy mentioned you've been asking a lot of questions about hydraulic systems lately. Sarah nodded. I think we're seeing the early stages of a systemic problem, but I need historical data to prove it. The computer systems only flag individual component failures, not fleet-wide patterns that might indicate design or maintenance issues. Elena was quiet for a moment, then walked to a filing cabinet that looked like it predated the computer age. You know, before these fancy database systems, we used to track everything manually. Trends, patterns, unusual failures, everything went into written reports that actually told the story of how aircraft systems behaved over time. She pulled out several thick folders containing handwritten maintenance logs and component replacement records. What you're looking for might be in here, but Sarah, you need to be careful. Wellington's been asking questions about mechanics who spend time on activities that aren't part of the approved protocols. He's particularly interested in anyone who seems to be challenging the computer diagnostic systems. As Sarah spread the historical records across Elena's desk, she began to see patterns that confirmed her worst fears. The hydraulic seal failures and pressure system irregularities she had been documenting weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a broader pattern, affecting multiple aircraft in the Pacific Airways fleet. The computer systems, programmed to analyze individual aircraft in isolation, had missed the fleet-wide trend that the manual records clearly revealed. But she also realized that presenting this evidence would put her in direct conflict with Wellington's modernization program and could cost her the career she had worked so hard to build. The choice before her was becoming clear: remain silent and hope her concerns were unfounded, or risk everything to prevent what she increasingly believed could be a catastrophic failure. The call came in at 0547 hours on a Thursday morning in November, just as Sarah was completing her pre-shift inspection of the maintenance bay. Her radio crackled with the urgent voice of air traffic control, followed immediately by an emergency announcement that sent a chill through the entire facility. Pacific Airways Flight 298, Boeing 737-800, experiencing hydraulic system malfunction en route from San Francisco to Denver. Aircraft declaring emergency and requesting immediate return for landing. All maintenance personnel to emergency stations. Sarah's blood ran cold as she heard the tail number, N847PA, the same aircraft she had been monitoring for months. The same hydraulic system she had repeatedly flagged for additional inspection, now failing exactly as she had predicted it would. 47 passengers and crew were aboard an aircraft, flying at 35,000 feet with a compromised hydraulic system that the computer diagnostics had classified as perfectly safe. Just hours earlier, the maintenance facility erupted into controlled chaos as emergency protocols activated. Wellington appeared from his office, barking orders into his radio while consulting the digital maintenance logs on his tablet. Morrison coordinated with the emergency response teams, his face pale as he realized the implications of what was happening. The aircraft that had passed every computerized inspection was now limping home with the exact type of failure Sarah had warned about. Chen, Rodriguez, Santos, suit up for emergency response, Morrison called out, his voice tight with controlled panic. We need a full hydraulic team ready for when 298 touches down. This is going to be a manual landing with minimal hydraulic assistance. Sarah grabbed her emergency kit, but her mind was already racing ahead to the real problem. If N847PA's backup hydraulic system was experiencing the stress patterns she had documented, and the primary system had now failed, the pilots were flying an aircraft that might have no hydraulic control at all. Landing gear deployment, flight control surfaces, brake systems, everything could be compromised if the backup system couldn't handle the full load. In the air traffic control tower, Flight 298's pilot, Captain Rebecca Martinez, was fighting to maintain control of an aircraft that was becoming increasingly unresponsive. The primary hydraulic system had failed catastrophically during climb-out, and the backup system was struggling to maintain pressure under the sudden increased demand. The computer systems were still reporting the backup as functional, but Martinez could feel through the controls that something was fundamentally wrong. San Francisco approach, Pacific 298. Martinez's voice crackled through the radio. We've lost primary hydraulic pressure completely. Backup system is showing green on diagnostics, but I'm getting sluggish response from flight controls. We're going to need emergency equipment standing by. In the maintenance facility, Sarah listened to the radio communications while pulling on her emergency response gear. Every word from the cockpit confirmed what she had feared would happen. The backup system was still showing as operational on the computer diagnostics, but it was clearly struggling under the increased load. The stress patterns she had documented were manifesting exactly as she had predicted they would. Wellington was frantically reviewing the digital maintenance logs, his confidence in the computer systems visibly shaking as he tried to understand how an aircraft with perfect diagnostic reports could be experiencing catastrophic failure. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered to Morrison. "Every system check shows green. The aircraft was cleared for service this morning with no anomalies." Morrison, overhearing Wellington's confusion, glanced towards Sarah with an expression that mixed dread with dawning realization. 3 months of her warnings about hydraulic system degradation suddenly took on a new significance as they watched those exact predictions playing out in real time at 35,000 feet. "Sir," Jason Ward interrupted, approaching Wellington with a tablet displaying real-time telemetry from the aircraft. "The backup hydraulic system is still showing operational parameters within normal range. According to our diagnostic protocols, the system should be fully capable of handling the increased load from the primary system failure." Sarah couldn't remain silent any longer. "That's exactly the problem," she said, stepping into the conversation despite the breach of protocol. "The backup system has been operating under increasing stress for months. The computer diagnostics measure instantaneous pressure and flow rates, but they don't account for cumulative fatigue in the system components." Wellington turned to face her, his expression a mixture of frustration and desperation. "What are you talking about, Chen?" "The diagnostic systems monitor every aspect of hydraulic performance continuously. Mr. Wellington, I've been manually testing that aircraft's hydraulic system for months. The backup system has been showing micro-fluctuations in pressure that indicate seal degradation and component stress. The computer systems classified those fluctuations as normal operational variance, but they're actually warning signs of imminent failure under increased load." Morrison stepped between them, his voice urgent. "Sarah, are you saying you knew this was going to happen?" "I documented everything," Sarah replied, pulling out her personal maintenance folder. "Pressure variations, component stress patterns, degradation trends, it's all here. I tried to raise these concerns multiple times, but the computer diagnostics kept showing green, so my reports were dismissed as unnecessary." In the cockpit of Flight 298, Captain Martinez was discovering just how prophetic Sarah's concerns had been. The backup hydraulic system, which should have been capable of handling the full aircraft control load, was beginning to fail under the stress of operating beyond its designed capacity. The seals that Sarah had identified as degraded were now leaking under pressure, and the system that the computers insisted was fully operational was rapidly losing its ability to control the aircraft. "San Francisco approach, Pacific 298, Martinez's voice carried new urgency. "Backup hydraulic system is now showing pressure loss. We're experiencing significant control difficulties. Request immediate clearance for emergency approach and landing." The air traffic controller's response was immediate. "Pacific 298, you're cleared for immediate return. Emergency equipment is standing by. Wind is calm, visibility unlimited. You're cleared for straight-in approach to runway 28 left." Back in the maintenance facility, Sarah found herself in an impossible position. The aircraft was in the air with a failing hydraulic system that she had predicted would fail, but there was nothing she could do from the ground to help the pilots maintain control. The knowledge that could have prevented this emergency was documented in her maintenance logs, but those logs had been dismissed as irrelevant by the same computer systems that were now proving catastrophically inadequate. Wellington was studying Sarah's handwritten charts with an expression of growing horror. The careful documentation of pressure variations, the trend analysis showing system degradation, the predictions about backup system failure under increased load, everything she had tried to warn them about was laid out in meticulous detail. Why? Didn't you insist on grounding the aircraft? Wellington demanded, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I tried, Sarah replied quietly. Multiple times. But the computer diagnostics showed green, and your protocols don't allow for grounding aircraft based on trend analysis that stays within operational parameters. Every time I raised concerns, I was told that subjective human observations were unreliable compared to objective computer data. Morrison was already on the radio with the emergency response teams, coordinating the equipment that would be needed if Flight 298 managed to reach the airport. Foam trucks, medical personnel, and specialized recovery equipment were being positioned. Along runway 28 left in preparation for what could be a catastrophic landing attempt. What can we do from here to help them? Morrison asked, turning to his maintenance team. Is there any way to restore hydraulic pressure remotely or give them better control options? Sarah was already thinking through the possibilities, her mind racing through the manual procedures she had studied from older aircraft maintenance guides. There might be a way to manually operate some of the hydraulic systems if they can access the manual backup controls. But it would require someone who understands the mechanical override procedures. The pilots won't know those procedures, Morrison said grimly. Modern pilot training focuses on managing computer-controlled systems, not manual mechanical backups. Then, we need to walk them through it, Sarah replied, moving toward the radio equipment. The manual controls are still there. They're just not part of standard operating procedures anymore. If we can guide them through the mechanical backup systems, they might be able to regain enough control to land safely. Wellington, who had been silent while processing the implications of what was happening, finally spoke up. Chen, you're saying that manual procedures that we classified as obsolete might be the only thing that can save that aircraft. Sarah met his gaze directly. Mr. Wellington, that aircraft is flying on systems that your computer said were perfect, but which are failing exactly as the manual testing predicted they would. Right now, the procedures you called outdated might be the only hope those 47 people have of getting home alive. As Flight 298 began its emergency descent towards San Francisco International Airport, Sarah prepared to do something she had never done before: guide pilots through manual flight control procedures that hadn't been used in commercial aviation for decades. Using knowledge that everyone had told her was worthless in the modern age of computerized aircraft systems, standing in the maintenance facility's radio room, Sarah faced the most critical decision of her career. Through the speakers, she could hear Captain Martinez's increasingly strained voice as Flight 298 descended through 25,000 feet with failing hydraulic systems. The backup system that should have maintained full aircraft control was deteriorating rapidly, exactly as her months of documentation had predicted it would. Morrison handed her the radio microphone, his face grave with the weight of what they were asking her to do. Sarah, you know these manual systems better than anyone else here. If there's a way to help them regain control using mechanical backups, you're the only one who can walk them through it. Sarah took the microphone, her hand steady despite the magnitude of the situation. She had studied the manual flight control procedures for the Boeing 737-800, not because they were part of standard maintenance protocols, but because she believed in understanding every system on the aircraft, including the ones that were never supposed to be needed. Now 47 lives depended on knowledge that Wellington's modernization program had classified as obsolete. Captain Martinez, this is Sarah Chen, aircraft maintenance specialist on the ground, she spoke into the radio. I'm going to walk you through some manual backup procedures that might help you regain hydraulic control. These aren't in your standard operating manual, but they're built into the aircraft's mechanical systems. Martinez's voice crackled back through the static. Sarah, we're showing complete primary hydraulic failure and the backup system is losing pressure rapidly. Computer diagnostics are still showing the backup as operational, but the controls are Becoming increasingly unresponsive. We need options fast. Behind Sarah, Wellington paced frantically while consulting his tablet, trying to find some computerized solution to a problem that the computers had failed to predict or prevent. Jason Ward stood nearby, his confidence in technological solutions visibly shaken as he watched manual procedures become the last hope for the aircraft's survival. "Captain, I need you to access the manual reversion panel behind the first officer's seat," Sarah instructed, drawing on knowledge she had gained from studying maintenance manuals that predated computer-controlled hydraulic systems. There should be a series of mechanical override switches that can isolate individual hydraulic circuits and allow manual control of critical systems. In the cockpit, First Officer David Kim was already moving toward the panel Sarah had described. "I see it," he reported. "There are 6 switches labeled for different hydraulic circuits. Which ones do you want us to activate?" Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the aircraft's hydraulic schematic from memory. She had spent countless hours studying these systems, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she understood that every component of an aircraft was connected to every other component in ways that computer diagnostics couldn't always predict. "First, isolate the failed primary circuit by moving switch number 1 to the closed position," she instructed. "That will prevent the damaged system from draining fluid from the backup reservoir. Then activate manual reversion for the flight control surfaces using switches 3 and 5. Morrison stood beside her, following the conversation while coordinating with air traffic control and emergency response teams. Around them, the maintenance facility had fallen silent except for the radio communications, as everyone understood that they were witnessing a battle between human knowledge and technological failure at 20,000 feet. "Manual reversion switches activated," Kim reported. "I'm feeling some response returning to the flight controls, but it's still very sluggish. The computer is showing warnings about operating outside normal parameters. Ignore the computer warnings." Sarah replied firmly, drawing on her military experience with aircraft that had been forced to operate far outside their designed parameters. "The computers are programmed for normal operations with full hydraulic pressure. Right now you're operating on mechanical backups that the computer systems don't understand." Wellington moved closer to the radio, his voice tight with stress. "Chen, are you sure about these procedures? We're asking them to ignore computer warnings and operate systems manually that haven't been used in commercial aviation for years." Sarah turned to face him, her expression reflecting the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Wellington, your computer system said that aircraft was safe to fly this morning. Those same computers are still saying the backup hydraulic system is operational, when it's clearly failing. Right now the procedures you called obsolete are the only thing standing between those passengers and a crash." Captain Martinez's voice cut through their exchange. "Sarah, we're descending through 15,000 feet and we can feel some improvement in control response, but we're still having problems with landing gear deployment. The hydraulic pressure isn't sufficient for normal gear extension." Sarah's mind raced through the manual gear extension procedure she had studied but hoped never to need. The Boeing 737-800 had mechanical backup systems for landing gear deployment, but they required specific knowledge of the aircraft's manual override procedures that weren't part of standard pilot training. "Captain, there's a manual gear extension handle located in the floor panel between the pilot seats," she instructed. "It's covered by a removable plate marked emergency use only. You'll need to remove that plate and use the manual crank to lower the gear mechanically." In the cockpit, Martinez and Kim worked frantically to locate and access the manual gear extension system. These were procedures that neither pilot had ever performed outside of simulator training, and even then, only in abbreviated form. The real aircraft had mechanical complexities that the simulators couldn't fully replicate. "Found the manual extension handle," Martinez reported. It's requiring significant force to operate. Is that normal? Yes, Sarah confirmed, remembering the physical demands of manual gear extension from her maintenance training. The system is designed to work without hydraulic assistance, but it requires considerable manual effort. Keep cranking until you feel the gear lock into position. You should get 3 green lights on your gear indicator panel. Elena Rodriguez had joined the group around the radio, bringing additional maintenance manuals and technical drawings that might be needed if other systems failed. Her decades of experience with aircraft mechanical systems made her one of the few people in the facility who understood the significance of what Sarah was attempting. "Sarah," Elena whispered, "the manual braking system on these aircraft requires specific pressure application techniques. If they come in too fast or apply brakes incorrectly without hydraulic assistance, they could lose control on the ground." Sarah nodded, already thinking ahead to the landing phase and the challenges that would face the pilots once they reached the runway. Without full hydraulic pressure, the aircraft's normal braking systems would be compromised, requiring manual techniques that commercial pilots rarely needed to use. "Captain Martinez, as you continue your approach, I need to brief you on manual braking procedures," Sarah transmitted. "Without full hydraulic pressure, your normal brake pedals will have limited effectiveness. You'll need to use maximum manual pressure and be prepared for longer stopping distances." Flight 298 was now visible on approach to runway 28 left, its landing lights cutting through the late afternoon haze as Martinez fought to maintain control of an aircraft that was responding to her inputs through mechanical linkages rather than computer-assisted hydraulic systems. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, their crews prepared for the possibility that even Sarah's manual procedures might not be enough to ensure a safe landing. In the air traffic control tower, controllers had cleared all other traffic from the airspace around San Francisco International, giving Flight 298 absolute priority for the emergency approach. The entire airport had essentially shut down to focus on bringing home an aircraft that was flying on backup systems the industry had assumed would never be needed. "Sarah, we have all 3 gear down and locked," Martinez reported, her voice carrying a note of hope for the first time since the emergency began. "The manual procedures are working, but we're still dealing with very limited flight control authority. This approach is going to require everything we've got." Sarah keyed the microphone one more time, drawing on every lesson she had learned about aircraft systems, human performance under stress, and the importance of preparation for scenarios that everyone hoped would never happen. "Captain, you've done the hardest part. The manual systems will get you home, but trust your training and trust the aircraft." These mechanical backups were designed by engineers who understood that sometimes computers fail and humans have to take over. As Flight 298 lined up for final approach, Sarah realized that the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of 47 people aboard the aircraft, but the future of maintenance protocols throughout the aviation industry. The success or failure of manual procedures that had been classified as obsolete would either vindicate her years of preparation or confirm Wellington's belief that human judgment was inferior to computer analysis. The radio crackled with Martinez's final transmission before landing. "Sarah, whatever happens in the next few minutes, thank you for giving us options when the computers couldn't. We're coming home." Flight 298 descended through the final 1,000 feet of its approach, Captain Martinez wrestling with controls that responded sluggishly to her inputs through mechanical linkages that hadn't been designed for primary flight. "Control." Sarah stood at the radio microphone, her eyes fixed on the runway through the maintenance facility's windows as the aircraft materialized out of the haze, its approach angle steeper than normal as Martinez compensated for the reduced control authority. "Pacific 298, you're slightly high on glide path." The air traffic controller's voice crackled through the speakers. "Runway 28 left is clear. emergency equipment standing by. Sarah keyed her microphone, her voice steady despite the tension gripping everyone in the maintenance facility. Captain Martinez, remember that without full hydraulic pressure, your elevator response will be delayed. Start your flare earlier than normal and use gentle inputs. The mechanical systems will respond, but they need more time to translate your control movements. In the cockpit, Martinez could feel the difference in how the aircraft was flying. Every control input had to be anticipated and applied earlier than her training had taught her. The Boeing 737-800 was essentially flying like an aircraft from decades earlier, when pilots had to work harder to make machines respond to their commands. Flaps are set for landing configuration. First Officer Kim reported, his hands moving across the manual controls that Sarah had guided them through. Manual extension is holding steady, all gear down and locked. Sarah watched through the windows as the aircraft lined up with the runway centerline, noting the way it wallowed slightly in the air as Martinez made corrections using the limited flight control authority available through the mechanical backup systems. This was exactly the kind of flying that modern pilots train for in simulators, but rarely experienced in actual aircraft. Looking good on approach profile, Sarah transmitted. Remember, when you touch down, immediate manual braking pressure. Don't wait for the computer systems to engage. They may not respond properly without full hydraulic pressure. Wellington stood behind her, his tablet forgotten as he watched the real world. Consequences of the technological failures he had insisted were statistically impossible. Around him, the maintenance team that had implemented his efficiency protocols was witnessing the practical value of the manual procedures they had been trained to. Consider obsolete. The aircraft crossed the runway threshold at exactly the right altitude and airspeed. Martinez's skill evident in how she had adapted to flying an aircraft that was responding through mechanical systems rather than computer-assisted controls. But the most challenging part of the emergency was still ahead, bringing the aircraft to a safe stop on the runway without the benefit of normal braking systems. Touchdown, Martinez's voice came through the radio as the main landing gear contacted the runway with a firm but controlled impact. Sarah could see the aircraft from the maintenance facility windows, its nose gears settling onto the concrete as Martinez immediately began applying manual brake pressure through pedals that now required significantly more force to operate effectively. Manual brakes applied, Kim reported, his voice tight with concentration as he helped Martinez control the aircraft's direction during the landing roll. We're getting some braking action, but it's not like normal operations. Sarah keyed her microphone again, drawing on her knowledge of aircraft systems under emergency conditions. Captain, you're doing exactly right. Maintain steady pressure on the brake pedals, but don't pump them. The manual system works differently than the computer-assisted brakes. It needs consistent pressure to build stopping force. Through the windows, she could see the aircraft rolling down the runway, decelerating more slowly than normal, but maintaining directional control as Martinez and Kim worked together to bring it to a safe stop. Emergency vehicles paced the aircraft along the runway, ready to respond if the manual braking system proved insufficient. Morrison stood beside the radio equipment, coordinating with the airport emergency teams while monitoring the aircraft's progress. How much runway do they have left? He asked Elena Rodriguez, who was tracking the aircraft's position using binoculars. About 3,000 feet, Elena replied. They're slowing down, but not as quickly as normal. Sarah, should we advise them about any additional braking techniques? Sarah considered the options, remembering emergency procedures from her military training when aircraft had to land with compromised systems. Captain Martinez, if you need additional stopping power, there's a manual parking brake handle to the left of the center console. You can engage it gradually to supplement the wheel brakes, but be careful not to lock the wheels. The aircraft continued its extended landing roll, now past the midpoint of the runway, but still moving at considerable speed. In the cockpit, Martinez could feel the manual braking system working, but she could also feel that it wasn't going to be enough to stop the aircraft within the remaining runway distance using conventional techniques. "Sarah, we're going to need that parking brake option," Martinez transmitted, her voice calm but urgent. "We're not decelerating fast enough with just the wheel brakes." "Copy that," Sarah replied. "Engage the parking brake handle gradually, don't pull it all the way at once. Let it build up stopping force progressively while maintaining directional control with the rudder pedals." Kim's hands moved to the parking brake handle Sarah had described, a mechanical control that most commercial pilots never used outside of gate operations. In an emergency like this, it became an additional tool for stopping an aircraft that was operating far outside its normal operational parameters. "Parking brake engaged," Kim reported. "I can feel additional stopping force building up. We're starting to decelerate more effectively." Sarah watched through the facility windows as the aircraft's deceleration became more pronounced, the combination of manual wheel brakes and parking brake finally providing enough stopping power to bring the Boeing 737-800 under control. But she also knew that the most dangerous moment might still be ahead, when the aircraft finally stopped and the emergency evacuation procedures began. "Captain, once you're stopped, you'll need to shut down the engines immediately and prepare for emergency evacuation," Sarah transmitted. "Without normal hydraulic pressure, some of your emergency systems may not operate as expected. Be prepared to use manual backup procedures for evacuation slide deployment if necessary." The aircraft finally came to a complete stop approximately 500 feet from the end of runway 28 left, its emergency landing roll covering nearly 2 miles of runway surface. As soon as the wheels stopped turning, emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, their crews ready to assist with evacuation procedures and assess any damage from the hydraulic system failures. Wellington approached the radio equipment, his expression a mixture of relief and dawning realization about the implications of what had just occurred. "Chen, you need to maintain radio contact with them through the evacuation process. We need to make sure all passengers and crew get off safely." Sarah nodded, keying her microphone again. "Captain Martinez, emergency crews are in position around your aircraft. How are your passengers doing? Any injuries or panic situations in the cabin?" "Passengers are calm," Martinez replied, her voice carrying the exhaustion that comes after successfully managing a life-threatening emergency. "Flight attendants are preparing for normal disembarkation rather than emergency evacuation. The landing was smooth enough that most passengers probably don't realize how serious this situation was." In the passenger cabin, the 47 people aboard Flight 298 were indeed unaware of how close they had come to a catastrophic accident. The manual procedures that Sarah had guided the pilots through had worked so effectively that the landing felt only slightly different from a normal arrival. They had no way of knowing that their safe return to San Francisco International Airport had depended on maintenance knowledge that the airline industry had classified as outdated and unnecessary. Morrison was already on another radio channel, coordinating with airport operations and corporate headquarters to manage the aftermath of the emergency. The successful landing of Flight 298 would trigger extensive investigations, media attention, and fundamental questions about maintenance protocols throughout the aviation industry. "Sarah," Morrison said, covering his radio microphone, "the FAA is going to want detailed reports about everything that happened here today. They're going to want to understand how manual procedures prevented what could have been a catastrophic accident when the computer systems failed to predict or prevent the hydraulic failures." Sarah looked at her maintenance folder, still open to the charts and data that had documented the impending failure of N847PA's hydraulic systems. Months of warnings that had been dismissed as unnecessary would now become the foundation for understanding how a major aviation accident had been prevented through procedures that everyone had assumed were obsolete. All passengers and crew have disembarked safely. Martinez's final transmission came through the radio speakers. Sarah, I don't know how to thank you. Your knowledge of those manual systems saved 47 lives today. We couldn't have done this without your guidance. As emergency crews began their detailed inspection of the aircraft, Sarah realized that the successful resolution of Flight 298's emergency had changed everything, not just for the passengers who were now safely on the ground, but for the entire approach to aircraft maintenance and the value of human expertise in an increasingly computerized industry. The maintenance facility fell silent as the radio communications ended, the weight of what had just occurred settling over everyone present. 47 people were walking away from an aircraft that should have been a catastrophic accident, saved by procedures that Wellington's modernization program had classified as obsolete. Sarah set down the radio microphone, her hands finally beginning to shake as the adrenaline of the emergency started to wear off. Wellington stood frozen near the radio equipment, his tablet displaying diagnostic reports that continued to show N847P as backup hydraulic system is operational even after its catastrophic failure during flight. The contradiction between what the computers insisted was true and what had actually happened in the air represented a fundamental challenge to everything he had built his career on. Morrison was the first to break the silence. Sarah, I need you to compile everything, every maintenance log entry, every pressure reading, every concern you documented about that aircraft. The FAA is going to want a complete timeline of how you predicted this failure when our diagnostic systems missed it entirely. Before Sarah could respond, the maintenance facility's main doors burst open and a team of federal aviation investigators strode in, led by Senior Inspector Patricia Hayes. Hayes had a reputation throughout the industry as someone who didn't accept easy answers or corporate explanations when aircraft safety was involved. Her presence meant that the Flight 298 incident would receive the most thorough investigation possible. I'm looking for Sarah Chen, Hayes announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting immediate answers. I understand. You provided critical assistance to Flight 298 during their emergency landing using manual procedures that aren't part of standard protocols. Sarah stepped forward, still holding her maintenance folder. Yes, ma'am. I guided the pilots through manual hydraulic system overrides and emergency landing procedures when their computer-controlled systems failed. Hayes studied Sarah intently, then turned her attention to Wellington, who was clearly struggling to process the implications of what had occurred. And you are? Marcus Wellington, Director of Maintenance Operations, he replied, his earlier confidence completely absent. I implemented the modernization program that standardized our maintenance protocols around computer diagnostic systems. The same protocols that cleared this aircraft for flight this morning, despite the catastrophic failure that occurred hours later? Hayes asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. Wellington's silence was answer enough. Hayes turned back to Sarah, noting the worn maintenance manuals and hand-drawn charts in her folder. Ms. Chen, I need you to walk me through everything you documented about this aircraft's condition. The preliminary reports suggest you predicted this failure months in advance. Sarah opened her folder and spread out the charts she had maintained, despite being told they were unnecessary. Inspector Hayes, I first noticed pressure irregularities in N847PA's backup hydraulic system 3 months ago. The computer diagnostics classified the readings as within normal parameters, but manual testing revealed microfluctuations that indicated seal degradation and increasing system stress. Hayes examined the meticulously maintained records, her expression growing more serious as she recognized the thoroughness of Sarah's documentation. You continued monitoring this aircraft despite being told these procedures were unnecessary? Yes, ma'am. I maintained personal maintenance logs because I believed the computer systems were missing critical information about long-term component degradation. The automated diagnostics measure instantaneous values, but they don't analyze trends that indicate approaching failure. Morrison approached the group, carrying additional maintenance records that Elena Rodriguez had retrieved from the parts facility. Inspector Hayes, we found historical data that supports Sarah's findings. The hydraulic seal failures and pressure irregularities she documented aren't isolated to N847PA. They appear to be affecting multiple aircraft in our fleet. Hayes took the historical records, scanning through pages of handwritten maintenance logs that revealed patterns the computerized systems had missed. Mr. Wellington, how does your maintenance program account for fleet-wide degradation patterns that don't trigger individual aircraft failure alerts? Wellington struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't incriminate his entire modernization program. Our computer systems are designed to optimize maintenance efficiency by focusing on aircraft that show actual component failures rather than theoretical degradation patterns. Admiral, I accept the position, Sarah said, understanding that she was being given an opportunity to ensure that other mechanics wouldn't face the isolation and dismissal she had experienced when trying to raise safety concerns. But I have one condition: any new protocols we develop must be tested and validated by experienced mechanics in real-world conditions, not just in computer simulations. Blackwood smiled, the expression of someone who had hoped for exactly that response. Miss Chen, that's precisely why we need you in this position. The aviation industry has learned a valuable lesson from Flight 298, but it's going to take someone with your experience to make sure we actually implement the changes that are necessary. As Sarah left the Admiral's office, she reflected on the one-wadi journey that had brought her from a dismissed maintenance mechanic to a position where she could influence aviation safety policy nationwide. The manual procedures and institutional knowledge that had been classified as obsolete were now being recognized as essential components of comprehensive aircraft safety programs. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the training facility at Pacific Airways, watching a group of mechanics practice the manual hydraulic testing procedures that had saved Flight 298. Morrison, who had been promoted to Chief of Maintenance following Wellington's departure, served as her liaison in implementing the new FAA protocols that balanced computer diagnostics with human expertise. The new procedures are working well, Morrison reported as they observed the training session. Our mechanics are finding problems that the computer systems miss, and we're catching potential failures weeks before they become critical. The Flight 298 incident taught us that efficiency without safety isn't really efficient at all. Elena Rodriguez approached them, carrying the latest maintenance reports that showed how the integration of manual and computer diagnostics was improving safety margins across the fleet. Sarah, I wanted you to know that we've identified and corrected similar hydraulic issues on 6 other aircraft in our fleet. The manual testing procedures you developed are literally saving lives every day. As Sarah watched the mechanics master the procedures that had once been dismissed as unnecessary, she realized that the quiet preparation and institutional knowledge she had maintained, despite organizational pressure, had created lasting change that would benefit aviation safety for decades to come. The Flight 298 emergency had demonstrated that sometimes the most important skills are the ones that everyone hopes will never be needed until the moment they become the only thing standing between disaster and survival. 2 years after the Flight 298 incident, Sarah stood before an auditorium filled with aviation maintenance professionals from around the world at the PA International Aviation Safety Conference in Denver. The presentation she was about to deliver had become legendary in the industry, not just for the dramatic rescue it described, but for the fundamental shift in thinking it had inspired about the relationship between human expertise and technological systems. The audience included mechanics, engineers, airline executives, and regulators from 6 continents, all gathered to learn from the lessons of what had become known as the Pacific Airways miracle. Sarah's story had spread far beyond the aviation industry, becoming a case study in business schools, military academies, and safety programs across multiple industries where the balance between automation and human judgment was critical. 3 years ago, I was considered the mechanic who couldn't let go of the past. Sarah began, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium sound system. My colleagues thought I was wasting time on outdated procedures, studying manual systems that modern aircraft would never need, maintaining equipment that computers had made obsolete. Today, those same procedures are standard protocol at airlines worldwide. In the front row sat Captain Rebecca Martinez and First Officer David Kim, both now serving as instructors in the new manual systems training programs that had been established at airlines throughout North America. Their presence at Sarah's presentation represented the unique bond that had formed between the ground crew who had provided guidance and the flight crew who had trusted that guidance with their lives and the lives of their passengers. The morning of November 15th changed everything, not just for the 47 people aboard Flight 298, but for how our entire industry thinks about safety, expertise, and the role of human judgment in an increasingly automated world, Sarah continued, advancing to a slide showing the aircraft after its successful emergency landing. Admiral Blackwood sat in the 3rd row, having traveled from Washington specifically to hear Sarah's presentation. Under her leadership, the FAA had implemented the new human factors in aviation maintenance protocols in a record 8 months, driven by the urgency of preventing similar incidents at other carriers. The programs had already identified and corrected potential failures at dozens of airlines, validating Sarah's approach to integrating manual expertise with computer diagnostics. What we learned from Flight 298 is that redundancy isn't just about having backup systems, it's about having backup ways of thinking, backup methods of analysis, and backup sources of knowledge that can function when our primary systems fail. Sarah explained to the attentive audience, computers are incredibly powerful tools for analyzing data, but they can only analyze what they're programmed to recognize. Marcus Wellington sat in the back of the auditorium, his presence a testament to his own transformation following the Flight 298 incident. After months of reflection and retraining, he had become an advocate for the balanced approach to maintenance that Sarah had pioneered. His new position as Director of Safety Integration at a major aircraft manufacturer focused on ensuring that technological advances enhanced rather than replaced human expertise. The hydraulic system failures that nearly brought down Flight 298 were completely predictable if you knew what to look for and how to look for it, Sarah continued, displaying the hand-drawn charts that had documented the aircraft's deteriorating condition. But our industry had created an environment where that knowledge was considered unnecessary, where the people who possessed it were viewed as obstacles to efficiency rather than guardians of safety. Alina Rodriguez watched from the audience, now serving as the head of the new institutional knowledge preservation program that Pacific Airways had established to document and transfer the expertise of experienced mechanics to younger technicians. Her work had become a model for other airlines seeking to balance the benefits of modern technology with the irreplaceable value of human experience. Today, every major airline in North America has implemented integrated maintenance protocols that combine computer diagnostics with manual verification procedures, Sarah reported, showing statistics that demonstrated the program's success. We're detecting potential failures an average of 3 weeks earlier than computer systems alone, and we've prevented 14 incidents that could have resulted in in-flight emergencies. Similar to Flight 298, Tommy Rodriguez had traveled from San Francisco to attend the presentation, representing the new generation of mechanics who had embraced the integrated approach to aircraft maintenance. His transformation from someone who had mocked manual procedures to one of their most effective practitioners demonstrated how quickly attitudes could change when the value of traditional knowledge was properly demonstrated and taught. But perhaps the most important lesson from Flight 298 isn't about maintenance procedures or diagnostic systems. Sarah continued, her presentation building toward its conclusion. It's about the importance of listening to the quiet voices, valuing the people who prepare for disasters that may never come, and understanding that expertise isn't always measured by how loudly someone speaks or how well they fit into organizational hierarchies. The audience included dozens of mechanics who had similar stories of being overlooked or dismissed for maintaining knowledge that others considered outdated. Sarah's success had inspired them to speak up about safety concerns, knowing that the industry was now more receptive to expertise that didn't fit conventional patterns. 3 years ago, 47 people boarded an aircraft that computer systems said was perfectly safe to fly. Those same computer systems continued to report normal operations, even as the aircraft's hydraulic systems failed catastrophically at 35,000 feet. The only reason those passengers walked away from what should have been a disaster was because someone had maintained knowledge that the industry had decided was no longer necessary. As Sarah concluded her presentation, the standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, but more importantly, the changes her story had inspired were now embedded in aviation safety protocols worldwide. The quiet mechanic who had once been mocked for her obsession with manual procedures had fundamentally altered how an entire industry approached the balance between technological efficiency and human expertise. In the months following the conference, Sarah's integrated maintenance protocols were adopted by aviation authorities in Europe, Asia, and Australia. The Flight 298 incident had become more than a dramatic rescue story. It had become the catalyst for a global reassessment of how modern industries could benefit from technology while preserving the irreplaceable value of human knowledge and experience. The legacy of Flight 298 lived on, not just in the lives that had been saved that November day, but in the countless future emergencies that would be prevented by mechanics who had learned to trust their expertise, speak up about their concerns, and maintain knowledge that everyone hoped would never be needed, until the moment it became the only thing standing between safety and catastrophe. 5 years later, Sarah received a letter that brought tears to her eyes. It was from Emma Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, a 7-year-old girl who had been aboard Flight 298 with her grandmother, traveling to visit family in Seattle. Dear Miss Sarah, the letter read in careful child's handwriting. My grandma told me you're the reason we didn't crash. I want to be a mechanic like you when I grow up, so I can help keep airplanes safe. Thank you for knowing the old ways that saved us. Sarah smiled, remembering her father's words from years ago. The most important skills are the ones you hope you'll never need. Emma's letter reminded her that expertise isn't just about solving problems. It's about inspiring the next generation to value knowledge, preparation, and the courage to speak up when it matters most. Today, Sarah's training programs operate at over 200 facilities worldwide. The Chen protocols have prevented 47 documented in-flight emergencies, and Flight 298's passengers have become advocates for aviation safety, often sharing their story of the quiet mechanic who refused to let important knowledge disappear. Captain Martinez still flies for Pacific Airways, now serving as chief pilot for safety training. She always tells new pilots, technology will take you far, but when everything fails, it's human expertise that brings you home. Sometimes the heroes aren't the ones in the spotlight. Sometimes they're the ones working quietly in the background, maintaining knowledge that others call obsolete, preparing for emergencies that may never come. And when disaster strikes, They're the ones who step forward, not because they want recognition, but because they know how to help out their preparation. Changes everything. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and join our community where we share real stories of everyday heroes who make extraordinary differences. What's your story of quiet expertise that saved the day? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.